Right, cool. Um, Great. So, my name is Catherine Hurst. This is a Link Up Startup workshop. For obvious reasons, we're delivering these online instead of in person at the moment, so to not, create any unnecessary risks. But yeah, today I'm going to be talking to you about the new Enterprise Allowance scheme. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about starting a business, the pros, the cons, just so if you decide that you want to go forward with starting a business through the scheme or not through the scheme, you do it from an informed standpoint. You know what you're getting yourself in for. So yes, I'm going to be talking about the new Enterprise Allowance scheme today. You may know a little bit about it already. If not, no problem. That's what this is all about. So yeah, let's dive into it, shall we? Right, here's where I tell you where the toilets are and to turn your phone off, but not much point doing that. So yes, the new Enterprise Allowance. I'm going to explain this now with the help of a helpful diagram. So the new Enterprise Allowance is a scheme designed to help people who are in receipt of benefits to start a business. It's done through a series of support that is offered, and I'll take you through that as well as sort of the general timeline involved at the moment. So the Link Up Startup Workshop is what this presentation is. The next step would be a SIFT appointment. I'll go back and I'll talk about that later, but that is essentially an interview with an advisor like myself who will talk to you about your business and work out whether it is the right time to right for yourselves to let you onto the scheme and to progress your business. It may be that you're not ready at that point. It may be that it's not a feasible idea. There are several reasons that you might not get onto the scheme. It would be irresponsible of us to just let anyone start a business, even if it's not feasible. So that interview is designed to help understand whether or not you're ready. We of course want you to be well informed going into that interview, so we ask you to fill in a checklist, which I'll go into a little bit later, to work out whether or not you should proceed to book a SIFT appointment. But I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later. I'll start by just explaining the scheme. So at a SIFT appointment, if that is a positive SIFT, so if you are on the scheme, at that point there starts a timeline of 12 weeks. At the end of those 12 weeks, you need to have a business plan submitted and approved. So that means that in reality, you have 10 weeks to complete a business plan to our template, which again, I'll go over later. And then you allow two weeks for that business plan to be reviewed and approved. During that time, during that 10-week period, you also need to attend 3 advice appointments. Now, usually those would be in person, but at the moment we are working obviously over the phone and digitally and Skype and things like that. But you will have 3 business advice appointments with a business advisor from the supply chain partner that will have provided you with this email, with this link on it to this workshop. You will also need to attend a course, importantly a seminar on finance and a seminar on marketing, which again will be a provision from the supply chain partner. You'll also, and during that whole time, you will need to use those resources to help fill in a business plan to our template, which I will show you in a little bit. So during this time, during these 12 weeks, you don't need to job search, or your job search requirements will be reduced. We don't control how much you have to job search, but it should be reduced at least. It is at the discretion of your work coach of the job centre, but usually the case is your job search requirements are not there anymore. You don't need to do that. The idea is you spend that time working on your business plan, getting ready to building the foundations of a business. And also during that time, benefits you received are unchanged. So you don't need to job search, but you will still receive this sort of unchanged benefits. The need for job search will be replaced for your need to work on your business plan. So you'll be expected to work on it for about 16 plus hours a week at least during this time. Okay, so you've jumped through all those hoops. You've completed a business plan. You've gone to business advice appointments, and you've gone to those seminars. Once you have submitted your business plan, which should happen before the 10-week stage of this 12-week process, so that there's 2 weeks to process it and to send it off for approval. Once it has been approved, you go and see your supply chain partner, and they will sit with you and they will register you as self-employed. So they'll register you maybe as a sole trader or as a limited company. If you don't know what those two terms mean yet, that's completely fine. I'll go over them in a little bit, but essentially what they do is they sit down and they register you with the taxman, and they register you as self-employed. After that point, you are able to start trading. You need to start trading. And you need to provide the job centre with proof that you're trading. They may ask for other proof as well, such as your business plan, such as proof that you've been registered with HMRC, which your supply chain partner should be able to provide you because they'll have sat down and done that with you. Basically, they'll ask for proof that this is a viable business. And once they're satisfied of that, you then receive the new Enterprise Allowance. So the new Enterprise Allowance, as stated in this diagram, just here, for the first 13 weeks after it has been approved by the job centre, is £65 per week, and 13 weeks after that, it's roughly halved to £33 a week, and then it's cut off. It's £0 a week after that point. Now, this new Enterprise Allowance you receive on top of your universal credit. So you should, as I say, you should receive your universal credit as well as your new Enterprise Allowance. Now, what should be said, and what hopefully may be obvious, is taking an income in from any source, not just a business, but taking in an income can impact the amount of universal credit you receive or general benefits you receive. However, it should not impact your new Enterprise Allowance payments. So, to reiterate, you receive your universal credit, and on top of that you receive new Enterprise Allowance. Your universal credit can be impacted and can go lower because you're taking an income from a business or from any source. However, your new Enterprise Allowance payments should not be impacted. You should still receive those. Now, having said this, the job centre are the ones that administer the payments and do have the final word on how that is done and how they work with that. They, if anything they say supersedes what I say, but this is what has been communicated, should be the case. Right, so going back to that SIFT appointment. So before any of this happens, you would need to pass a SIFT appointment. Sit down with an advisor who looks at your business idea and talks to you, and understands whether it's the right move to progress you onto the scheme. Now, there are a few reasons that the answer to that might be a no. And you might not be allowed onto the scheme, and obviously there's no point going to that SIFT appointment if you don't believe you're going to be allowed onto the scheme. So to make sure that we're not wasting anyone's time, we ask you to complete a checklist to understand where you're at. It should be included as an attachment to the email that the link to this workshop came through, and that checklist just helps to understand, right, where am I at in my business? Do I have a business idea? Do I understand where I'm going to get? Do I understand what my startup costs are? And a few questions to help you understand where you're at. And if all those questions are yes, then in theory it should be very likely that a SIFT appointment would be positive. If there's no's on that list, then it's not a sure thing at all. And in fact, it may be the case that you're inappropriate for a SIFT appointment if, for example, you don't have a business idea, or you don't understand your startup costs, or you're not able to cover your startup costs. A few reasons, as I said, that a SIFT appointment could be negative would be, for example, say your business idea relies on you getting a qualification that takes 6 months. In which case, it wouldn't be feasible to have you on the scheme at this point, because you need to be to the point where you are able to trade in 12 weeks. Another example could be that you're not aware of your startup costs. You don't know how much money it will take you to get you to trading. Because the new Enterprise Allowance, as I've said before, you need to start trading in order to trigger that allowance. So, although it is helpful with the ongoing costs of running a business, it is not so helpful with the startup costs of running a business. So those startup costs have to be, first of all, you need to understand what they are, and second of all, you need to identify how they're going to be covered. ideally you'd be covering those costs would be covered perhaps from like self-funded. There is an option of a loan that you can access through this scheme. However, it is a personal debt. So basically what would happen is you apply for a startup loan through the startup loans company through this scheme. How that works is it works the same as any other loan. It is a personal debt. It's not a debt that your business has and you don't have. You have that loan for business purposes, but is a personal loan. It also works. It has a interest rate of about 6.2%, but check the startup loans website to make sure of that, because it can change. Also, just a good place to go to get an understanding of what that agreement would be between yourself and the loan company. Another thing to consider is that the loan will require a credit check. Much like any other loan, it will still require you to have an automated credit check done against you, and if you have any CCJs or bad credit history, missed payments and stuff like that, it'll be an automatic no before anyone has looked at the application. So to give you an idea of how applying for a loan may impact this sort of timeline, how it would work is you would need to, at the SIFT appointment, be aware of what the loan would be for, so what your startup costs are, at least have a very good idea of what those are. And also, I have to say, if you're applying for a loan, your business idea, your plans, your sort of the feasibility of your idea will be held to a much higher standard. We'll want you to it will be irresponsible of us to have you apply for a loan for a business that we don't think is feasible. So you will need to provide a good case that business can be feasible, can take in a good income that will allow you to pay that loan back, and will be worth that sometimes quite sizable financial risk. So the process is you go through the whole 12-week timeline if that SIFT appointment is positive, and your business plan will need to be completely watertight. Because imagine just any situation when someone is lending someone money. The person lending the money will need to be certain that the money will be paid back. They'll want to know exactly how much it is. They'll want to know exactly what it's being spent on. And all of that needs to be covered in your business plan. And you'll need to provide some evidence that you'll be able to pay that loan back within usually 2 years, sometimes 3. Rarely more than that. So yes. And then, so once you have your business plan you submit your business plan, it's been approved. Then at that point, you use that business plan to set up a loan application between you and yourself with the transmit loan company, the startup loans company, essentially. So that is something that we are not involved with. It is an application that you make to the startup loans company, and they will require your business plan to proceed with the application. They'll also complete a credit check on your behalf. Now, something that's very important to note is that a business plan being approved and you being does not mean a loan is approved. That loan being approved is subject to the loan company, and we have no involvement with that. So you go through this whole process, you get your business plan approved, and then you use that business plan to apply for a loan. Now, that loan amount can be anything between £500 and £25,000. And that application can take months in some cases, and at the end of that months-long process, where they might perhaps have a lot of communication with you, they might ask for more information. They might ask for more information about yourself, about your business plan. That process can still be a no at the end of that amount of time. So essentially, where possible and where reasonable, you want to avoid applying for a loan, or in any circumstance getting in a situation that will get you into debt. Starting a new business, it's best in most circumstances to try and be as risk averse as possible, and to essentially try and keep your startup costs to as low as possible. So say, for example, maybe you wanted to get premises. in order to sell clothes, that's fine for a business where you've figured out exactly where the market is and exactly who your customers are, and realize that financial risk is worth taking. But initially, you may want to set up an online shop to try and see if the demand is out there without putting yourself under the tremendous financial risk of getting a lease for premises. Now, if that's another thing I should bring up. If you would need premises for your business, first of all, you need to understand the cost of that and how much and how you're going to cover the cost of premises. But another thing you need to understand is, that premises take an awful long time, are often much longer than 12 weeks to sort out. So you would need to, at the point of the SIFT appointment, be at the stage where you have at least a copy of the lease agreement. I would not advise signing the lease agreement. Actually, I'd very much advise against it. Do not sign a lease agreement before this whole process. And before you even consider signing a lease agreement, I would always suggest you have it looked over by a lawyer, someone with legal experience who will be able to bullet point the sort of points in that lease agreement, so you know what you're getting yourself in for. It's a huge financial sort of commitment that you make under a lease agreement sometimes. Okay, right. So that is the sort of general outline of the scheme, and the general timeline going forward if you were to come on the scheme. If you the next stage essentially, if you would be to, you should have within this email sent to you with the link to this workshop on it, have a checklist. So at the end of this presentation, fill in that checklist, and it will help you understand whether or not you are ready for a SIFT appointment and what you would need to do in order to be ready for a SIFT appointment. So right, we'll head back now to the presentation and we'll continue on there. But that was the breakdown of the new enterprise allowance. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about first of all, I'm going to once again say that this scheme is partially funded by the EU, the European Social Fund. So this is why you'll see this symbol in quite a lot of places if you were to participate in the project. As I say, obviously, in the long term, we'll be impacted by the UK leaving the European Union, but at least in the short term, in the next year or so, should not be impacted, this project in general. But, who has a crystal ball? No one. So what I wanted to talk about is motivation for self-employment. The reason that everyone watching this should have at some point, maybe to their job coach, had a reason that they wanted to pursue self-employment. And here's a few examples of the benefits to self-employment, the reasons that people try and pursue it. One of them being flexible hours. So you can decide when you work. That is one of the huge benefits of self-employment. You decide what hours you work. You decide what you do. Now, that is true. To some extent, it's not true, though, because your hours are dictated by your customers. Your hours are dictated by when your customers need you and sort of when they're available. So if you were aiming at people who work 9 to 5 and you had a call line that was only open between those hours, you wouldn't be catering to those customers, for example, just as an example. So to some extent, yes, you are in charge. You're your own boss. You're in charge of your own hours. But in another sort of sense, you almost have as many customers. You almost have as many bosses as you have customers that sort of determine your hours. So yeah, just keep that in mind. The ability to make your own decisions is another huge benefit, though, and decide the course of the business. Not have someone make those decisions for you. It's very much a sense of control, job satisfaction, especially if you're pursuing sort of a business idea or a business that you're really motivated or passionate about to pursue. I mean, I think that is absolutely vital, if I'm honest, in a business, because it's not the easy option. It's not a necessarily easy thing to do. There's a reason not everyone starts a business. So you need to have motivation and passion about what you're doing, or else it's going to be incredibly hard work. I mean, it may already be incredibly hard work, but it's going to be much harder if you don't have that motivation, if you don't have that passion. Potential income is another reason that people pursue self-employment. Obviously, in many cases, when it comes to employment, your income is limited by your salary, but when it comes to self-employment, your income is much more closely linked to essentially what you put into the business and what you get out of it. So that is of course a plus side in terms of and also income. The income you make will much more likely be going straight to you rather than working for someone else and being a sort of middleman, middlewoman, middle person. So yeah, the potential income you can make can in some circumstances be a lot higher, especially if you have a business where you've identified a need and you've identified a target group and customers that want to buy from you. That's when the income becomes possible. If you don't have that, then it's quite the opposite. Pursuing something you're interested in, as I said, pretty important. It's even if the thing you're doing isn't what you're passionate about. So say you are maybe you don't like. Let me have a think. So like, say if you're an artist and you're very, very passionate about art, that's often half the work done when you're running a business, selling artwork. If you're not if it's not your lifetime goal to do cleaning or something like that, that's fine, as long as you're passionate about running a business, as long as you're passionate about pursuing this, and that's the important thing. If you don't want to start a business, you shouldn't start a business, is my main point. You need to really, really want to do it, and also it needs to be that, because that's going to drive you through starting a business and running a business. Utilizing skills, perhaps you have a skill set that is in need and that you can use and that can really help drive your business forward. So those are some benefits of self-employment. A lot of the time as well, people mostly quote the fact that general employment often doesn't suit their needs when it comes to things like childcare or maybe medical needs and things like that, is another very common reason I hear when I run these workshops. So yeah, just to name a few of benefits of self-employment. So those are the reasons that people often say that they want to pursue it. Now you're going to guess where I'm going now. Things to be taken into consideration. We worded it very nicely. Essentially, the bad side of starting a business. Up there at the top, and I think very important to consider, is financial security. Every business will have some sort of risk associated to it. So whether that is the financial risk, the risk, any business, you'll put in something. You'll put in either money, you'll put in time, you'll put in resources, and there's often no guarantee as to whether you'll get anything back from it. So you need to, and the whole reason that we encourage people to, write a business plan, to seek business advice, to understand before you jump in whether your business idea is viable, is to minimize these risks, because every business comes with a risk, and we can minimize those risks, but we can by no means get rid of them. So yeah, that is absolutely something to be taken into consideration before you start a business. Holiday and sick pay, in most employment scenarios, you would receive, if you were off sick, you would still get that stable income, or you could take holiday as well. Not necessarily the case in self-employment. So just, again, something to consider, especially, and it can be a huge risk, especially if it's a one-person operation. If you're off sick, the business effectively could grind to a complete halt. Now, there's a few ways you can plan around that. So, for example, you may, say you're a photographer. If you made connections with other photographers and you found you were off sick, you could perhaps ask them to cover you when you were ill, and vice versa. If they're off sick, they could throw some work your way. There are a few ways to deal with that, but in general, essentially, yeah, that is a real downside to self-employment a lot of the time. Long hours, it's hard work, and that's why it's so important to especially in the first year or so of starting a business, it can be absolutely exhausting. And it's important to make sure that you take care of yourself, that you take care of your mental and physical well-being, and that you make time for the things you enjoy. So, it is burnout is an actual real risk for new businesses. People working too hard, they get exhausted, and they do themselves some mischief. So essentially, just make sure you are taking care of yourself. Make sure that you are making time to consider your health and well-being. Nothing's more important than that. Isolation. So sometimes running a business, especially if you don't know anyone else that's starting a business or running a business or hoping to start a business even, if you're the only person you know pursuing that, it can be very isolating. So if that's the case, it's your job to try and build a network of people that are doing the same thing. So whether that's online, probably advisable at the moment, what with the whole pandemic, in normal scenarios, networking events would be a good idea, but as I say, not at the moment. Trying to find people wanting to achieve something similar to you. It doesn't have to be the same business exactly. Just people starting a business essentially could be a great sort of network of people to keep in contact with. And you can build that online, LinkedIn, social media, things like that. Business networks online or on Facebook, all over the place. Try and reach out and try and make connections with people. As well, this is a role that the enterprise agencies fill as well through offering business advice. Someone to talk to about your idea if you have no one really that understands what you want to pursue. That's a need that they fill as well. Family, I suppose by that I mean not necessarily family, but maybe people close to you, family or friends. It may be the case that people close to you don't understand, for example, what you want to achieve. We've had clients in the past where, so for example, they find themselves starting a business, so find themselves working from home all day, and their family has been like, ooh, free childcare, or oh cool, they can run this errand then. They're not doing anything, they're just at home all day. I think good communication all around is important, just to make sure people close to you are aware this is your job, this is your profession, and you are taking it seriously, and you need to set aside what time and energy you're spending on it. So just making sure, as I say, good communication all around, that people understand that commitment you're making. And tax returns. So tax returns are another thing that you have to think about if you are self-employed that you wouldn't have to if you were, for example, employed. They're essentially the government wanting to know essentially two numbers: what you've made and what you spent to make it. What I'll do is, I think I'm talking about tax. Yeah, so I'm talking about tax in this slide, so I'll go ahead and sort of lay out how it works. In the simplest possible terms, if you're a sole trader, I know what I'll do. I'll explain what a sole trader is and a private limited company, and then I'll circle back to tax. So, the two most common business structures, which is something you'll have to consider, what structure do you want your business to be, would be a sole trader and a limited company. You may have heard of both of those terms. So a sole trader is the sort of simplest way to become self-employed, really. It is free. It's essentially just a case of you signing up with HMRC and registering for self-assessment. So a self-assessment tax return is when you say, you tell the government what you've made, what you've spent, what business expenses you've made in order to make that money, and any income really that you get in, and then they let you know how much tax you owe. So as a sole trader, what you do is you register with the government and become a sole trader, and you are essentially telling the government, right, I am now self-employed, and you and your business are the same legal entity. You have the same finances, you have the same legal liability. If someone sues the business, they sue you as well as the business. You're the same person. Technically, your finances are the business's finances, so you don't technically need a different bank account. However, in all cases, we would advise that you do have a separate bank account, because although it is not necessarily a legal requirement that you have a separate business bank account if you're a sole trader, it is very likely against the terms and conditions of your current account. Or most bank accounts that aren't business bank accounts. There used to be some exceptions to that rule, but the banks have really stamped down on it. So essentially, yeah, in either case, you'll need a separate business bank account. Now, the difference, and that's completely free to do, a limited company is you creating a separate legal entity that is the business. And money sort of comes in and out of that business as expenses or wages out to you, or sort of expenses for the business, and that is a separate legal entity with its own business bank account. Now, the main benefit, one of the disadvantages of this is you have to submit accounts that are publicly available every year to Companies House. So any limited company, you can see what money is going in and out of the business, and that may be something that you might not want to share. So that might be a reason against having a limited company. As I say, you also have to publish these accounts to Companies House, and these accounts, as I say, have a bit of information about yourself. It'll have the business address on them. So and in many cases with a new business, that'll be your home address. So you might be sacrificing a little bit of privacy there. However, one of the biggest advantages of a limited company is it being limited liability and being sort of separate from yourself. To give an example to illustrate this, that a lawyer we work with gives quite often. So they had a client where they were a builder, and they were building a 15 grand extension to a person's house. When they were building that extension, they accidentally cut the internet line of that house. And what they didn't realise was that their internet line, a stockbroker was working in that house and relied on that internet line to trade. And they essentially, that stockbroker lost hundreds of thousands of pounds in sales due to that internet line being out of action for 3 days, and sued the builder. Now, the builder was a sole trader, so when they got sued, the builder got sued. That person got sued, even though that was for business purposes and accidental damage during business purposes. They are the business. They are the same person because they are a sole trader, so they got sued. They lose their house and their mortgage and all that sort of stuff because it's all the same. Their businesses, their finances are the business's finances, and blah blah blah. If they were a limited company, yes, the business may have got sued, and the business's assets and things, and the business may have fallen apart and had to close down, but that sort of damage would have been limited to the business. This is why it's called a limited liability. So yeah, pluses and minuses to both. You need to consider the level of risk in your business, and whether it was and whether it's sort of worth whether it is worth setting up that structure to protect yourself. It's all up to you. It's not free. It costs about £12 to do so. But yeah, in those circumstances, it all depends on your individual circumstances and what works for you. A lot of the time, excuse me, people will start off as a sole trader, and then a bit of time down the road, when they've established the business is going okay, they'll switch to being a limited company. That's fairly easy to do. So yeah, you're not necessarily stuck in one if you choose it. But yeah, something to be aware of and something to consider. Now, HMRC and tax. So, as I said before, when you are self-employed, you're not necessarily taxed, especially in the simplest case of being a sole trader. You're not taxed as you go along. Like if you were in a job when you got your paycheck, it would come with a bit of money taken off it to pay your tax. But when you're self-employed, what you got to do is you got to keep track of all the money you make, and you got to keep track of all the money that you spend for business purposes. And then you tell those two numbers to the government, and they will tell you how much tax you owe at the end of the year in one big go. To give you an idea of how that works out, and how much tax you may be expected to pay, everyone has a tax-free allowance of £12,500. So everyone can make £12,500 before they have to pay any tax. So if you just made 12.5 grand or lower than that, you don't have to pay any. You wouldn't have to pay any tax. After that, though, any money you make after that, it is 20%, up to 50 grand. So any money you make between 12.5 and 50 grand, that's 20% tax needs to be paid on that. Now, something to make clear is that tax, that amount that you're taxed on, is the profit of your business. And what I mean by profit is the money you make minus the money you spent to make it. So say, for example, you made 20 grand in a year, but you spent 10 grand in order to make that money on things like stock or things like traveling to clients or anything, any business expenses purely for business purposes, in which case your profit wouldn't be 20 grand, it would be 20 grand minus that 10 grand you spent, so it would be £10,000. And that £10,000 is what you would be taxed on. So you wouldn't actually have to pay any tax because you haven't reached in that scenario, because you haven't reached the threshold. You haven't reached 12.5 grand. But however, you need to be able to prove, and this is why it's important to keep records of all of the money that goes in and out of your company. So receipts when you spend stuff, and proof of sales when you make them, because you need to tell the government those two numbers, and you need to be able to prove both of them in the event of an audit. So if you say you, as I say, that same scenario, made 20 grand, spent 10 grand to make it, you tell the taxman that, and then in the event, I'll say unlikely event that you get audited, but it can and does happen all the time. They say, right, you say you spent 10 grand, what proof do you have for that? And if you don't have any proof, they'll be like, well, if you don't have any proof that you spent 10 grand, then we're taxing you on 20 grand. So it's incredibly important that you keep records and keep track of the money you spend for business purposes, because that will lower the amount of tax. Well, it will mean you're not paying more tax than you should. One thing to keep track of is, in many cases, you can sometimes, as business expenses, claim things up to 6 years before you actually register the business. So if you've already bought something purely for business purposes, even though you haven't yet started your business, then you could put them down as a business expense in your tax returns. So yeah, very important to keep track of all money, and it's your legal obligation as well to keep track of all money going into and out of your business. National insurance is another thing to be aware of. So when you are self-employed, if you make just over 6 grand, you are then liable to pay Class 2 national insurance, which is about £3 which is £3 a week, which is approximately £150 over the course of a year. Class 4 national insurance kicks in when you make a profit of it's just over £8,000. So any money you make, and that is 9% of profits made over £8,000 and a bit. So something to consider, if you're able to, if it's feasible for you, it can be advisable to essentially put aside every £4 you make, so 25% of what you make, because then at the end of the year, up to a certain amount, you'll then, if you've put that aside in like a savings account or something, you'll have enough money to cover that tax bill, and also probably the national insurance bill, and also probably have a bit left over for any other expenses. So So if you can, I understand not everyone can, but that's one way to sort of try and help deal with that tax bill at the end of the year. Because yeah, it's so important to understand as you go along how much tax you may need to pay. Because as I say, it doesn't happen as you go along. It's one bill, it's one sort of lump bill at the end of the when you submit your self-assessment tax return. I'm just going to think of a few other things that are common, like hurdles that we have clients face. One thing that catches a lot of people out is if you have a vehicle that you're using for business purposes. So, for example, if you are driving to clients or driving to get stock, or in some cases as well, driving to your place of self-employed work. If you don't have car insurance for business purposes, you may be driving uninsured, which is illegal. So if you're using your vehicle for business purposes at all, it needs to be insured for business purposes. That's very crucial. If, for example, God forbid, if you're in an accident, you'll be asked at some point, like, what was the purpose of your visit? Or maybe there have instances as well of police, look in the back of the car and they see, like, handy person tools. And they'll be like, oh, you were going somewhere for business purposes. So be aware that, that's incredibly important because it is actually breaking the law to drive uninsured, as you should know. So, be very careful about that. Another common thing that can be useful is a thing called public liability insurance. Now, this type of insurance isn't, like the car insurance I just mentioned, a legal requirement. However, it can be very advisable. What public liability insurance is it protects you in the instance of a member of the public, which in this sort of scenario is pretty much anyone other than yourself or someone involved in your business. Them coming to harm, or in some scenarios their property coming to harm due to your business purposes, and them suing you. So usually accidental damage, it's not going to protect you in criminal proceedings and things like that. But so, for example, say you had a craft store and you were responsible for taking care of the area in front of the craft store, and it was there's a trip hazard there, someone fell over, broke their leg and sued you and your business. Public liability insurance would help to cover the cost of those legal proceedings and any amount they might sue you for, up to a certain amount that'll be specified in the insurance. Sometimes it'll also protect against damage to property. So, for example, you're a painter and you accidentally spilt paint on your client's carpet. And they wanted the money back for you doing that. In some cases, public liability insurance will cover that as well. But you need to check the insurance provider. They can be very tricksy. So, those are a few. Another thing as well, if you're thinking of starting a food-related business, you'll need a food hygiene certificate. So start pursuing that at the earliest possible opportunity. I think that's everything that springs to mind. Right, so the business plan. So I went over before the business plan, and you need to complete a business plan essentially in order to proceed on when you're on the scheme that will be approved. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the business plan so it's not a kind of surprise, and show you what it involves. So this one here has been actually completed by my manager, and what she's done is she's completed it to the sort of level of detail that we would expect a client to complete it to, in order to try and illustrate sort of what's expected of you from the earliest stage possible. So this is for a web development business. It starts with a bit of information about the person running the business. And I won't show you everything, but I just wanted to give you a sort of an idea of its scale so that it's not a nasty surprise. We start off with an executive summary, which is it's clues in the name. It's a summary about the rest of the business plan. It's a summary about yourself, about your skills and experience, the business idea itself, about the target customers, about the opportunities going forward, and the startup costs. And what this is essentially a sum up of almost the whole business plan. And then the rest of the business plan is you going into a lot more detail about all those points. I won't go through every single bit, but as you can see, there's a hefty bit of information in every question, and this is what will be expected of you. You won't be able to have one word or one sentence answers. We need you to make sure, like, what you're trying to do in this business plan is convince the person reading it, I know what I'm doing, I'm the perfect person to start this business, and I can do it, and it's a feasible business. So it needs to be completed to a good standard. It will be the case that you'll need to sort of provide evidence that your business idea will be a feasible one after some amount of time, usually a year after you start trading. You will be expected to make what is known as the minimum income floor. So the minimum amount of income that you that's required for your business to essentially mean that you're making minimum wage, which is dependent on things like the number of hours you're working and stuff like that, and will be at the, as before, the discretion of your job centre as to what that actual number is of the minimum income your business needs to make. And if you don't make that minimum income, it may be the case that you're asked to sort of stop your business, shut it down, and return to job searching in order to still receive universal credit. So in short, this business needs to be feasible, and the business plan is your opportunity to explain why it's feasible. Right. So I'll just go through. I won't go through all the sections, but I'll go over some key ones. So this one, knowledge and experience. This is you explaining why you're the perfect person to start this business. Maybe you have some experience in the field. Maybe you've worked in it previously, or maybe it's a passion you've had. There are skills that everyone will have that will help them in a business. That, you know, for example, if you're good at communication, that can help you with customer support. If you've ever managed a budget, then that can help you with doing your accounts or budgeting within your business. If you had any experience on social media, that can help you set up social media accounts for your business. There'll be skills that everyone has, and don't be humble about them, that you can use to explain to the person reading this plan that you are suited to this business, and it's what you should pursue. Right, I'll go over, let's find another good section. Target market. Okay, I'm going over this because it's very important. You need to initially have some idea and then expand on within your business plan what your target market is. Now, by target market, I mean the group of people most likely to buy your product. Now, this doesn't mean that you won't sell to people who don't fall into that group. It just means that they're the most likely group to buy your product. And the reason it's so important to figure out who your target market is to save you time and energy. So if you are running a business, you know, it's quite a common thing for clients to be like, well, anyone can buy from me, anyone is allowed to buy from me, so my target market is everyone. And that means that when it comes to marketing, you have this sort of shotgun approach where you just, you know, send marketing material out to everyone, whether it's on Facebook or in leaflets or whatnot, and no one feels spoken to in that, because it's got to be so generic because it's aimed at everyone. And also, you know, there's a huge number of people that applies to. Now, what will save you time and energy in the long run is to figure out, right, who am I aiming this product at, and how do I reach them? So, for example, say I want to open a dog walking business. I wouldn't aim that at everyone. I would aim that at people with dogs. And further on that point, you would aim it at people. So yeah, say I wanted to start a dog walking business. I'm trying to work out who's my target market. Firstly, the dog owners. That's obvious. Second of all, the dog owners with disposable income, because they will need to pay me to walk their dogs. They'll also need to be in a certain area, because I can't walk a dog in like New Brighton. It needs to be nearby where I live in Newcastle. And on top of that, just thinking of what is the age range of people likely to have a dog. You probably, you know, you don't see many students with dogs. They're going to have to be probably, I mean, most of the time you need to own your house in order to keep a dog in it. Most renters won't allow you to have a dog. So maybe that cuts out a certain age range, because people don't tend to look into buying houses until, you know, maybe their 30s or at least late 20s. So that way you've now got an age range that you could aim at. Or you could also do some research to find out, right, what's the age range most likely to own a dog. Okay, so now you've done that. Now you've worked out, right, who am I aiming at? you can then target your marketing materials at those people. So you can find, and there's many ways to do that, many ways to find out how to reach your target group. I mean, it could be as simple as putting up a poster in the notice board of the dog park, if you're a dog walker. Or it could be a case of as well doing paid promotion on Facebook, where you specify, right, I want this post to reach people of this age range in this group who have the interest of dogs. Once you've but the important step before you can do any of that is working out, right, who is my target market? Who is it going to be most worth my time and money and energy to aim my marketing at? Market research is this section. It's you showing that you understand the target group you're aiming at, as well as the just general industry. So something that might go into the market research of, as I mentioned before, a dog walking business could be, I'd work out what's the dog rate ownership, the sort of like the rate of dog ownership in the area I'm in. So I'd have a look into it. And actually, if you do look into it, you'll find that the Northeast has the second highest rate of dog ownership in the country. So that would stand to reason that there's a likelihood that there would be some demand for a dog walker in that scenario. So, it's all a case of finding out the sort of stats behind what makes your business feasible. That's what market research is kind of doing. I'll talk about competitor research. So some of the most useful information that you can gather can be on your competitors, because you kind of know what you're up against. And, if you find out there's a competitor in your area or in your your sector that's going to do exactly the same thing as you need to work out, right, why are people going to come to me instead of them? What do I do better? If I do something better, how am I communicating that to my potential customers? So like here, and also I should point out, your competitor doesn't necessarily have to be another business that does exactly the same thing as you. It could be, an example given here is, so this business plan here that my manager's filled out is, as I said before, for a web development agency. So someone that makes websites for people. A competitor of someone that makes websites for people is people learning how to make their own websites on YouTube. So that's actually one of the competitors listed here. And in many cases, your competitor, as I say, won't be a company. It'll be more of a concept or a thing people can do instead of buying from you. And you need to work out, what are you doing that's better than that option? And you can also learn a lot from your competitors in terms of pricing, what you can expect to charge. There can also be opportunities in competitors. If you find, I'm going back to dog walking. If you find a dog walker and they can't, they've got way too much work to deal with. You could maybe set up, if you could talk to them and build a business relationship with them, maybe they'll send some dogs your way to walk when you're trying to build up your customer base. There's other examples and stuff like that, but sometimes competitors can be an opportunity, essentially. Okay, this is the last thing I'll go through. But as you can see, it's quite a hefty business plan. It's about 30 pages long, and it does need, quite a lot of information in it. Sales forecast, though. So just to explain this part, a sales forecast, no business is going to make a flat line of sort of profits or sales throughout the year. There's always going to be sort of fluctuations. There's always going to be times when your business makes more than others. I mean, a prime example is any gift-based company, because any gift-based company can expect to make about 75% of their income in about 25% of the year, obviously because of Christmas. So how does a company deal with that? How does a company deal with the fact that January is going to be really, really quiet? Or they make sales forecasts to try and predict. I mean, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows exactly what's going to happen. But to try and predict when sales would be low, so when would be a good time to focus perhaps more energy on making stock, or to focus more energy on preparing marketing materials for when you expect it to be to sort of really take advantage of the busy periods. Essentially working out in the future how to dedicate your time and how to make the most efficient use of time when sales are high and low. I mean, other things that could affect The sales in your business could be, for example, if you were a business that catered to students in Newcastle, you'd find that things went a bit dead during the holidays when students go home for the holidays, things like that. Anything can impact. Lots of different factors can impact sales going up or down. This is you trying to work out and guesstimate, essentially, make an educated guess when they'll go up and down. Right. Okay. I lied. I'm going to go over one more thing, and that's startup costs. So this is you figuring out, what do I need to get me to the point of trading, and what is the cost of that, and how am I going to cover that cost? This is incredibly important in a business plan. You need to show that you understand that, and to be honest, I would expect that sort of understanding, at least roughly, before you even started a business plan. Startup costs are a real doozy to understand straight away, as early as possible. Okay, cool. So that was a few key elements of the business plan. So I'll move back to the presentation. Okay. There we go. A few more things to think of. Okay, startup costs. I've kind of been over those, but everyone should have an understanding of their startup costs. Make an Excel spreadsheet, write a list, run it past someone to see if there's anything that you've forgotten. Essentially, yeah, it's something that everyone needs an understanding of. It would be a bad sign for me if someone came to a SIFT interview and I asked them, what are your startup costs? And they said, I don't know. Because then you don't know what you're getting in for, you don't know what you're setting yourself up for, you don't know if you have the money to proceed. So essentially, yeah. Keeping accounts is another thing that every business needs to do, and that is, as I said before, making sure you keep records of any money coming into or out of your business. And it is your responsibility in a business to keep those records for quite a long time, at least 7 years, in terms of when you could be audited. So if you are audited, and that's when the government sort of looks at your tax return and says, right, we're going to look into this business and we're going to ask for proof of all these numbers that they've provided. They'll want to see things like receipts from up to 7 years ago at least, and you'll need to provide them. And you can, by the way, and I would advise, instead of keeping paper receipts and things like that, take pictures of them and record them that way. You'll still need to compile that information, and also it's still your responsibility to make sure that information is backed up. So if you have it on a laptop that you lose, or you haven't got it in more than one location, it's just, yeah, essentially make sure that you're prepared and have backups of any information that you're relying on to prove your business's incomings and outgoings. There's some software that you can get. There's loads of. I mean, if the thought of all these numbers, by the way, is freaking you out, and maybe numbers aren't your strong suit, and and it would cause you a lot of this sort of stuff causes you a lot of stress. I could also recommend that accountants can be, worth the money they cost. Sometimes, depending on the business, they can save you as much money as they cost to have them. An accountant will keep track of all the money coming in and out of your business and file accounts if you need to. So yeah, just something worth keeping in mind. You don't have to necessarily do everything yourself in a business. It can be worth your time and energy to outsource. As I said, sorry, there's some software, though, accounting software you can use to help you with this sort of thing. Some common ones are QuickBooks and Xero and things like that, worth looking into. Often are paid, though, often do require a paid subscription. Financial forecasts, something we've gone over. General operations, again, this sounds a bit obvious, but what needs to happen in everyday life of your business to make it happen? How's it going to happen? Are you going to do everything? What kind of hours are you going to work? What days are you going to work? When are you going to be available? When are you going to maybe stop work for, like, are there any holidays you're planning on taking, and what time of the year? Just trying to work out, like, what's the to-do list of a standard day of your business, and how does that, how are those things going to get done? Measurement and review is an incredibly important part of business. It's the difference between a business succeeding and failing. In every circumstance, you need to be able to understand how your business is doing, and if there are things you need to improve on. So, as a prime example, say you are trying to advertise your business and you are giving out 500. No, that's way too many. let's say 100 leaflets a month, and you've also got a Facebook page, and those are the two ways you're advertising. And say customers are coming through the door, and that's great. One thing I should also mention is if you want to put leaflets through people's doors in Newcastle, and in many other scenarios, it depends on the local authority, you will need a license to do that. Okay, that was a side point. But so say you're doing that. Say you're putting leaflets through doors, and you got a Facebook page and maybe an Instagram page. And say you're spending £50 a month on these leaflets, and maybe the other two you're just going for free. And customers are coming to you, and you're selling stuff to them. Maybe you sell cakes, okay? So things are going well, and that's all good, and you're getting customers. But how do you measure and review how those marketing methods are working? And it's important that you do. So and one of the easiest ways to do it in this scenario could be to ask customers, oh, how did you find out about me? And if all of them say, oh, I saw you on Instagram, or if all of them say, saw you on Facebook, and if none of them say, oh, I got this leaflet through my door, you now know that you can stop spending that £50 a month on leaflets. You can then understand what's working and what isn't, put your energy and resources into the stuff that's working, and stop wasting your time on the stuff that isn't. But you wouldn't have known that if you didn't have some way to measure how those different things are doing. So yeah, it's important to essentially have ways to make sure you understand like mechanisms in your business and how they're working, and if they need improving. Because no one, I'll tell you this for free, no one's going to get it right the first time, 100%. There are always ways that you can improve a business and how it operates. So, in terms of support, there are many wonderful agencies all over the Northeast that can provide support. You should have received this email from a supply chain partner who may be able to provide you support inside and outside the scheme. So please feel free to if you have any queries on anything I've talked about actually throughout the whole of this video, please feel free to get in contact with the supply chain partner who has emailed you sent you the email with the link to this presentation. And other support I can mention in the area is in the Newcastle City Library has a fantastic resource available called Experts in Residence, which is a series of people who are experts in their field. So, for example, experts in web development, or experts in certain legal matters, or even business development. And they provide for free sort of advice sessions, maybe like 30 minutes, sometimes closer to an hour, to give you advice on the areas that they have understanding in. So that's a fantastic resource that you can take advantage of. I mean, also in the library is the BIPC, the Business and Intellectual Property Centre, which is also a fantastic organisation and can give you advice specifically as well on things like intellectual property. So if you have ideas that you want to keep safe and things like that. This question and answer session might be a bit quiet because I can't hear anyone apart from me speaking. And yeah, essentially these are some things to get an understanding of. And what we'll do is we'll ask you to try and get an understanding of whether you are ready for a SIFT appointment. So as I said, that SIFT appointment is where you sort of talk to someone and understand whether or not you're ready to come onto the scheme. To try and make sure that SIFT appointment is a positive SIFT appointment and worth your time turning up to, we're going to ask you to complete a checklist. So that checklist will have been attached to the email that you should have received, and will have a series of questions on it. You need to tick yes or no to those questions in order to have basically to help the person reading it understand whether or not you're ready for a SIFT appointment, and yourself, because essentially in order to come onto the scheme, the answer to all those questions need to be yes. And you may need some support to get you to the stage where they're yes, in which case you can inquire with the supply chain partner. But essentially yes, to have the best chance of a positive SIFT appointment, all those answers need to be ticked yes. So it needs to be things like, I mean, some things on there are to do you have a business idea? Do you have an understanding of your startup costs? Do you have an understanding of how you're going to cover your startup costs? If you're looking to apply for a loan to cover those startup costs, do you have a credit history that would allow that to happen? Now, if the answers to any of those questions are no, it will be incredibly difficult for you to proceed onto the scheme. So there's also a few more questions, things like, do you have an understanding of the competition, the target market, lots of things like that. Understand where you're at with your business, and things like that. And essentially, all the answers do need to be yes for you to stand a good chance of being accepted onto the scheme. So that's why we send you that, so that you have an understanding and we have an understanding of where you're at. And you can send that, please, completed after you've I believe within, essentially, as soon as possible. I think today is the deadline. Send that attachment, fill it in, tick all the boxes, yes or no or not applicable, and then return that to your the supply chain partner that has emailed you this presentation. And then you'll have an understanding and contact with them about whether to proceed onto a SIFT appointment. If you are able to proceed onto a SIFT appointment, it is a case of contacting your job centre advisor, who will book that with the supply chain partner. I believe that's everything. As I said, if you do have any queries about any of the content covered today, please feel free to email the supply chain partner on the who has emailed you the link to this workshop. And thank you very much for listening. I hope everyone's okay, staying safe, staying healthy, and everyone, please wash your hands. Okay, right, bye for now.